What is your favorite local restaurant that isn't around anymore? What place do you miss the most? That is a question that comes up a lot here in nostalgic St. Louis, and it's the subject of this episode of Archie Eats. Hi, I'm George Mahey. I'm your host.
I'm Cheryl Bear, your partner in crime.
And this is going to be interesting because we're going to get into some of our favorite places that are no longer here. And then we will end the episode not with a micro rant, but with a micro rave about how to deal with the high cost of eggs, which is very timely and very important right now. What restaurants are doing about it and what you can do about it too. This episode of Archie Eats is sponsored by Stages St. Louis. But first, as we always do, it's what I can't stop thinking about this week, which we've kind of turned into a quick hit instead of a ramble. So go ahead, Cheryl. I'm going to give it to you. Go ahead and talk fast.
Sounds good. Talk fast. Exactly. Well, you have props for yours, so I feel like the pressure is definitely on for me. I went over to Grand Pied this past week, which is one of my favorite restaurants in Tower Grove South. I absolutely love it.
Is this about pancakes?
It's not about pancakes.
Okay.
That's why this is what I can't stop thinking about, because normally all I do is think about their pancakes. And they're excellent. I was over there, and of course I did have the pancakes, but I was with a group of people, so I was able to get a whole bunch of different items and share. I had the best hot honey fried chicken. Oh my gosh, it was incredible. It almost tasted like if you get hot braised chicken from a Chinese American style restaurant. It was whole chicken thighs, breaded, tossed in this gorgeous sticky hot honey, red chilies, absolutely incredible. Of course, I had them with a side of pancakes, so I am deeming Grand Pied's hot honey chicken and pancakes as the new chicken and waffles.
I love it.
Yes.
And sticky is the operative word. If it's not that's where finger licking good really should have come from, because you have to go there or you really got a mess on your hands.
Yes. And what was so great was the batter was still crunchy. So you got the crunch, the goo, the stickiness. It was just perfection.
For me, I was in a French bistro, and I was reminded of something that's common in the rural French countryside. It's a tradition called chabrot, Chabrot, and you take the last of the broth in your soup or stew or bisque and the last of your red wine, and you swirl it into the bowl.
Yeah, George, I was very confused. I saw this bowl and a bottle of wine.
And so what you do, though, there's no spoon, so you grab the bowl with your hands, and with your elbows on the table, you just slurp.
Oh, my gosh. I don't know.
And it's really, really good.
Is it?
I guess it depends on what kind of soup and what kind of pairing you've got going. But I just love the idea. Like I said, it's a rural tradition. So you do this with your elbows on the table in a nice restaurant.
Okay.
And people are going to be looking at you. And I say, go ahead and look at them back and say, hey, it's a French tradition.
I love it.
You're the uncouth one.
You are wearing a beret today, so I guess this is very
I totally got into it. So anyway,
apropos.
that's the tradition of chabrot. And next time you have some soup or some stew or some chowder, do that.
I may do it, although I've got a raised eyebrow. But I trust you. I should trust you on these things.
We'll be right back.
Experience the magic of live theater with Stages St. Louis. The 2025 season brings you 3 incredible shows, from the thrilling mystery of Murder for Two to the enchanting pre-Broadway production of Austin's Pride, and the inspiring sounds of Beautiful, the Carole King musical. There's something for everyone. Subscribe today and see all 3 shows for one low price. Secure your seats now at stagesstlouis.org. And now, back to the show. When we came up with this list, we were talking about restaurants. We just cannot get past their loss. I mean, we are grieving these places as if we're grieving the loss of a dear friend. These are places that just really special to us.
We've even written articles about it, and it's places that you would revisit if you could. And really, this is great for a party conversation, for dinner table conversation, when you're out at a restaurant. I mean, it's just good table conversation. What place do you really miss?
I probably have it once a month, easily.
And it's different places every time. And you talk to different people, you get different places. And today we're going to do, I think, our top 10 or 12. But we're going to turn it over to the listeners and say, okay, here's our places. What places really resonate with you? And we're going to ask the listener to write us, email us, and this could be fodder for another episode.
Yeah.
We could do this 2 or 3 times. I made a list and I made a secondary list and go, man, my secondary list is as good as my
I
primary.
know.
So anyway, that was the premise. And when we did write about this originally, I said, what's your favorite place? And on Facebook, we got 1,000 comments. So I know this is a hot button.
It's something that's so special to people, and everyone has their own spot. And I think that's important for people to know is when we came up with this list, without even trying, we had 50 or 60 places on it. Obviously, we can't fit those all in here. So these are kind of like, we pretty quickly recognized that there's a couple biggies out there
And
that are
we-
universally agreed upon.
We did. We agreed on most of them. So I alluded to a French place. You want to start with that one?
I will start with that one. So we think of Tom Schmidt as Salt and Smoke now.
The
That
barbec-
is
yeah, the barbecue guy.
restaurant. Tom Schmidt, who owns Salt and Smoke. However, Tom Schmidt got his start in the restaurant business. I think his first foray into being a restaurateur was with a wonderful French restaurant down in Soulard called Franco. And anyone who is a food enthusiast here in St. Louis knows about Franco. This was such a beloved restaurant. It was in this cozy, beautiful brick old space.
It was a baby buggy factory,
Oh my
remember?
God, I do.
And people that need to be reminded of the era, this was 2007. It was Best New Restaurant on many
Yes.
lists in 2007.
Oh my
That's where we
gosh.
are in the time.
So I feel that this wave that we're currently in the St. Louis restaurant scene, whatever you would call it, maybe the second or third wave of the modern upscale restaurant scene, I would say that Franco is one of those foundational places. I'd put it up there with other places we're going to talk about on this list.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking
Yes.
about.
Just elegant without stuffy. I think that that was a mark of this time period, and we still see it today. That you could have fine dining, you could have this really refined, beautiful cuisine, but you could also have it in a place without the pomp and circumstance.
And it had those wavy wooden panels that no
Yes.
one had ever seen before, that Space had designed. It was their very first restaurant project.
Oh, yes, it was.
And there were these wavy wood panels that also worked to abate sound. And it was just this unique
Yeah.
place. And it was French food, basically. And they had I forgot about this, a brie and walnut stuffed gougere.
Oh, yes. I do remember that. Their cassoulet
Their cassoulet.
was
They
legendary.
had a Provençal-style lamb shank, foie gras,
Oh, that lamb shank.
naturellement. They had sweetbreads,
Yeah.
a confit lamb belly.
Yes.
And somebody could open up a restaurant with that exact menu, and I think it would do fine.
Absolutely. Yeah. So these are not in rank order. I guess we should preface, although we will go ahead and crown our absolute most missed, but not in any particular order. Franco, near and dear to my heart.
What else you got?
What else I have here? So another place that I guess you could say it had some French elements to it. It also had Spanish, and it also had American. Hence the name Three Flags Tavern. This was a wonderful restaurant in Southwest Garden that, to me, is maybe the most quintessential St. Louis restaurant that has ever existed, in the sense that it embraced our history. It was named after that one moment when all three flags, the French, the American, and the Spanish flag, were all raised at the same time here in St. Louis. You had this gorgeous mural. Fun fact, another space designed restaurant. So here we are talking about them again. But
And I think it was just interesting that the name of the restaurant was also the culinary theme. They had
Yes.
American and Spanish and French dishes on the
And
menu,
it
which
worked.
and it worked perfectly.
it worked
It was so
beautifully.
easy to understand. You remember that big mural on that
That's
back
what I
wall?
was just getting at. That mural of the Louisiana Purchase, just to me, it embodied St. Louis history. I loved the feel of the place. The food was so good. Again, it was elevated yet accessible. And the dish that I missed the most, and here I am talking about an upscale restaurant, they had a burger that would light the world on fire. If anyone has been to Three Flags Tavern, they haven't thought of it in a while, and they hear the word burger, they're like, oh my gosh, you are not kidding. They had a thick, gorgeous burger that was that perfect blend of chuck, brisket, and short rib. So juicy, so perfect. Favorite thing on the menu.
It was a great restaurant in every way. And I remember writing, when you sit at the, there was a long banquette, and the folks that are sitting facing the wall at a banquet are always at a disadvantage. Like, okay, great, I get to look at the wall.
Yeah.
No, you get to look at this mural, which was really, really
it.
cool. And when somebody, this was back in the day, said, somebody gave you $1 million, what kind of place would you design? What kind of place would you do? I said, I would replicate Three Flags
Yes.
Tavern.
Absolutely.
And I feel that way to this day. It's still, somebody could do that again and be very successful.
They could. And here's a pro tip for people as well, if they feel nostalgic about that map. Shelley Niemeyer from Space told me that that was just a print of, I think it's a Bodmer map that is accessible to anyone. You can go online, you can download this map, and you can print it out yourself. So I've thought about doing that for
In
my
your dining
home.
room.
Yes, exactly. You can replicate. If you can't have Three Flags, at least you can have that map. So what about you?
I mean, and this was so hard. And we each came up with, 5 or so. I'm going to start out in Frontenac at Cardwell's at the Plaza for no particular reason, except that Bill Cardwell was a pioneer. He started in Clayton, and he moved. They opened in Frontenac several years later. And that place was just magical. It was like lightning in a bottle. We're not sure why it's so cool, but it had that bar area with that horseshoe-shaped bar, and they had all those little semi-private nooks, those semi-private dining areas that you could see into, but they were still private. They weren't walled off, but it was just with the right amount of privacy. And for the longest time, somebody said, what is your favorite restaurant in town and why? And I said, Cardwell's at the Plaza. And why is because it's so consistent. You've got Bill Cardwell, who was definitely a farm-to-table pioneer here.
Absolutely.
He grew up on a farm in Vermont, and he was the guy, and everything they had there was spectacular. They had, speaking of burgers, they had that, what do they call it, Bill's Burgermeister burger. That was just an awesome hamburger.
I was a pecan wood smoked shrimp fan with the little cheese wafer, the cheddar wafer that was like a high-end Cheez-It.
Yeah, it had a mustard glaze, and that wafer, they had a great flash fried calamari. It was just a wonderful place. And that bar, I just loved it because what's on the back bar? It's a pizza oven. So you could watch part of the kitchen action while you're sitting at the bar. You go to those movies at Plaza Frontenac and have a little light snack and a cocktail if the movie was a little rough. And it was just a good time. And I was sorry to see that go. It closed in the end of 2018. And if you remember, it was the first place I remember with the long, slow goodbye. He announced in September, Bill did, that we're going to close in the end of December. You've got 3 months to come check this place out. And it was a party for 90 days. And I wish more guys would close their restaurant that way.
I do too, because it really does give you a chance to say goodbye. And I think that's something that's so important because these are places that affect our lives.
Another one, again, near and dear to my heart because I was a partner. I was involved
I know where
with
this is going.
Harvest Restaurant, December of 1996, over on Big Bend, in very unassuming kind of Quonset hut-looking building. Looks like a dentist's office. It just didn't look. And then you walk in, and it's like, holy wow. Remember those walls? I called it Cantina Yellow. They were kind of this brushed dark yellow, which kind of a strange color for a restaurant, but it worked.
Oh, it was so warm.
It really worked.
Inviting.
One of my partners was Steve Gontram, who's now the 5-star burger guy. And what Harvest did that was unusual is they had items that nobody had ever seen or heard of before. Steve introduced a hanger steak, which I'd never heard of.
Yes.
Also called an anglais or a hanging tenderloin. Or a butcher steak. Why do they call it that? Because the butchers kept that cut for themselves. But nobody, I didn't know.
I didn't know that either.
I didn't know what an airline chicken breast was until they introduced it. He would do a grilled romaine salad, which was like a grilled Caesar salad. First guy to do that. That's become common. But what was really unusual is that Steve and his partner would shingle the entree. So you didn't have separate starch, vegetable, protein. Everything got shingled together. Every plate was a work of art. And people almost didn't want to eat it because it was so beautiful. So that was something that these guys did. And again, it clicked. It was a great restaurant. And it was one of the first restaurants that had a 3 or 4 week waiting line. And people get really mad because I ran the front of the house, I know. But it was an outstanding restaurant. And even to this day, when I say it had something to do with Harvest, I go, oh, I
I
love
know,
that
everyone
restaurant.
it's one of those that's right on people's lips when you ask what they miss, and I have to say, we cannot leave a discussion of Harvest without talking about the bread pudding. You wanna talk about one of those maybe most iconic St. Louis desserts. When people think, "What is the best dessert ever served in St. Louis?" I think Harvest bread pudding is probably top of mind.
It's at the top of the list. And we've all had bread pudding. I didn't like bread pudding before we
Oh,
did it there
really?
because it
Uh-huh.
was so heavy.
Yes.
Guys would take the bread
Mhm.
and jam it into the bottom of
Yeah.
the pan. It was real heavy and like brick like.
Dense, yeah.
And here, brioche was used,
Mhm.
cut into cubes, and the cubes were lightly tossed in the egg batter. So you have a lot of edges, a lot of crispy edges to Harvest bread pudding, which was part of the
Perfect.
allure. It
Perfect.
wasn't dense and heavy, it was
Mhm.
very light.
Fluffy, really soaked up all of the, like, gooey goodness in there. Oh, that was wonderful.
And one of the places that picked up on that was Harvest's predecessor in that building
Mhm.
was Cyrano's.
Oh, yes.
And I had something to do with Cyrano's too, but Cyrano's, it started up the street in the basement of
Mhm.
the high
Mhm.
fidelity showroom, and you would go down the stairs. There'd be a
Yes.
line that would go up the stairs because it was in the basement, and you'd see these TIAC reel-to-reels, and you'd see these Macintosh amps and these big monster pieces of electronic equipment because the hi-fi showroom was right upstairs.
Hi-fi faux fum, exclamation points, if
Exactly,
anyone remembers.
and it was just so cool. Anyway, you get down and there's classical music playing,
Mhm.
very dark, tablecloths, candles, and it was fairly expensive. And I remember it's where you took your good dates
Oh,
because this was a fancy place.
not the B team.
No, and they're known for their pastries and their little roast beef sandwiches. And something that young, inexperienced George didn't know anything about, but wanted to be very cosmopolitan,
Oh.
something called an espresso.
Oh,
And I ordered my
very
first
fancy.
espresso there, and I went, "Man, what is it? What is the deal with this bitter stuff?" And anyway, my taste buds developed after that, but I
Sure.
never remember my first taste of espresso was not a good one, and it was had at Cyrano's.
Oh.
But anyway, Cyrano's has since moved to Webster Groves and still is doing a lot of the things and more that it used to do,
Mhm.
including all those desserts, the famous Cleopatra, which is that
Oh
5
my
scoop
gosh, so good.
monster, and maybe the place that's most well known for the flambéed desserts. They do the 3 flambéed desserts
Mhm.
tableside. That's where I send people that want a tableside dessert.
Yeah.
So anyway, the original Cyrano's was great, and it's lived on. It's 60, 65 years old at this point now in Webster Groves.
Yeah. Now, George, we couldn't call the list, so we decided that we were going to combine Cyrano's with another restaurant that was located in a basement that, again, you just hear people lamenting the loss of this place on a weekly basis, and that's Racino's.
Completely different
Ugh,
place,
so different.
known for its pizza, one of the first pizza
I
parlors
loved
in St. Louis, but the
Racino's.
same kind of thing. You'd bang your head on the pipes going down the
Yes.
stairs. You'd bang your
Yes.
head on the pipes when you're in there. But Racino's was very, very fondly remembered, and a lot of famous Kim Tucci worked at a lot
Mhm,
of
mhm.
famous folks that went on to do other things worked at Racino's, including Mary Rose Del Pietro. Yeah,
Yes,
their family
yes.
owned part of it. So
Yes.
yeah, we wanted to give a shout out to Racino's for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, speaking of places that a lot of people who are names that we still recognize in the industry got their start or did a tour at, that's Monarch. Wow. What a concept. What a place that to me just revolutionized dining in St. Louis, this modern era of it. Monarch was right down the street from where we're recording here on Big Bend and Sutton, an ambitious undertaking. It was a huge restaurant, but also ambitious in its bar program. I mean, Ted Kilgore got one of his starts there in the business. Chris Howell,
Right.
one of the biggest names in the St. Louis wine scene at a particular point.
And went on to become a som at the French
At the French
Laundry. Might have
Laundry,
heard of that
exactly.
place.
Maybe a little known chef you might have heard of named Josh Galliano. I wouldn't say he got his start there by any means. He got his start down at Commander's Palace in New Orleans, but he was executive chef there at one point in time. Rick Lewis was there. Ryan McDonald was there. Gosh, you name it, Bob Brazel was there. I mean, it is a who's who of people who've gone on to own their own restaurants. And
And it was an interesting
wonderful.
place. Down the hall was an art gallery, and the main dining room was in back, but that front bar area was extremely cool.
Yes.
You know what my favorite part is, and I know you're going to agree with me
Oh.
here. In the kitchen, above the kitchen, up a flight of stairs, was something called the skybox.
Oh my gosh, George, I have goosebumps thinking of.
And you'd go up a spiral staircase and would seat 10 people, and it was all glassed in. And you overlooked the kitchen, all the action that was going on in the
It
kitchen.
was a gorgeous
And
kitchen.
when I first went there, it was the inaugural chef, a guy named Brian Hale, who
Yes.
would come up, and whatever Brian Hale was selling, you're buying, because this guy was
Mhm.
good. And I mean, I remember it to this day. That was the best chef's table experience that I can remember. That was
Absolutely.
at Monarch in that kitchen.
I feel like Monarch was a moment in time in the St. Louis restaurant scene where it just felt like things were just on fire and happening and exciting and everything was possible.
And somebody wrote back then, this is the closest St. Louis will get to a New York City caliber restaurant.
Yeah.
At the time, that was the place.
So speaking of places that were the place, I don't think we can have a discussion about St. Louis restaurants we miss the most without talking about a recent, very high profile, very sad to a lot of people closure, and that's Tony's, the icon of St. Louis dining. The fact that we are mourning the loss of Tony's, I think, really inspired us to have this discussion in the first place. I mean, this was a restaurant that really, to me, I think to most people, set the standard for fine dining in St. Louis.
It really did. It put St. Louis on the map back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. People would come to Tony's because of the awards that they had won. In 55, Tony's won the Holiday Award, which at the time was the most prestigious award in the country. Then they started racking up these Mobile Star Awards and the AAA Five Diamond Awards and all those. For decades, they had this, and it's built on itself. So when anybody came to town and wanted the finest dining experience, there was no question. That's where you went.
There was no question whatsoever. And I think the Clayton location was gorgeous. I mean, what a stunning space. There was so much to love about that. But the Tonys I miss, the Tonys that when someone says to me, tell me about your experience at Tony's, I dined at both of them. The one I miss the most is that Market Street location, downtown Tony's. That is the Tony's that will live on forever in my heart, in my mind. I loved that restaurant so much, and not to take away from the Clayton one at all.
It just felt special. They had
Yes.
the lights that came down over the tables. It was impeccably lit. They had those frosted panels everywhere, and the servers would kind of disappear behind these, and then they'd reappear,
Yeah.
and somebody'd come out from behind another one. And all of a sudden, you had this dance going, and it was magical. And that was, to me, the peak of fine service. Captain service was at Tony's. Really, almost till the day it closed in Clayton, you could have said the same thing. They had that captain system, and not too many people do that. It was very special, very magical.
There was something about sitting in Tony's that I think Matt McGuire does this. They have a way of making everyone in the room feel like the most important person in the room. That is just a gift. That is something that is instilled as a culture throughout the entire restaurant team. So you can't take away from it being a very intentional thing that came from the top, that came from Vince Bomarito Sr. I just remember feeling like it wasn't a stuffy situation. It was an elegant, refined, the most exquisite restaurant you could dine at in St. Louis. But there was something about your server made you feel like you were in on a secret with them that no one else knew about. But everyone felt that way. I don't know how they do it.
Even way back when, they did their homework. They knew who was dining, what they liked, what their preferences were if they've been there before. They knew that if this certain attorney was at this table, they don't want to put another attorney at the next table who might be a competitor. They thought everything through, and they made it look so seamless and natural.
Or maybe your wife and your mistress, they wanted to separate you. I've actually heard stories of that from Tony's lore.
Yes, there was a story of that. Yes,
Oh.
indeed there was, and someone vamoosed out the back door. We'll just leave it at that. But there are so many great stories of Tony's, and maybe my favorite owner Q&A was with Vince Bomarito Sr. To this day, and again, you listeners can look up the conversation with Vince Bomarito Sr. He told such great stories, and you really felt the specialness of the place just from some of the stories he told. I'll just tell one. They had an item at Tony's called the fillet of swordfish, and it was this perfect, like it had been manufactured. It was so perfect. And swordfish isn't perfect. It's
No.
oddly shaped.
Yes.
There's a red vein in there. Sometimes there's skin on it. And he did not want to do that. And he said, if I'm going to serve swordfish, I want these to be uniform pieces cut from the very center of the loin. And that's how he ordered them. And that's how he specified them. That's why everyone looked perfect. And he tells the story that months later, when he was visiting his seafood broker in Boston, he was introduced as the most particular son of a bitch in North America.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And he took pride in telling that story, but that's just a typical example of the extreme that these guys went to over the years.
What a legend. So what else do you have on yours? As we said, we could talk about 60 of them, but we're definitely not going to.
How about a little place called Niche? You ever heard of it?
Just a minor detail.
And everybody knows about it, but I think the original story, I'll try to be brief. Gerard Kraft was in Utah. He was looking for an affordable place to do a restaurant, and he was looking literally on Craigslist, saw this place in St. Louis down the street from Sydney Street Cafe, which was an acclaimed restaurant, and saw an ad on Craigslist for a wine bar. And he said, what the hell, I'm going to go check this place out. So he comes to St. Louis to look at this wine bar. The realtor shows him the building. He walks in, and it's got nothing to it. It's a dirt floor. And Gerard said, I thought you said this was a wine bar. And the guy goes, it could be. And that's how it started.
Oh, my
Gerard, who
goodness.
was 25, said, I didn't know any better. I said, what the heck? I'm going to do this. And he opened a place called Niche.
The benefit of youth, right?
Exactly. He said, I would have never done anything like that now.
Right.
But anyway, that's how Niche started. And this was in 2005. If you remember, he had that amuse-bouche that he started with
Yes.
every meal.
Yes.
That eggshell with the maple custard and the mushrooms and the bonito caviar. You remember? I would
do.
love to have one right now.
Oh, I do.
So Gerard obviously went on. He was a Food and Wine Best New Chef. He was a James Beard Award semifinalist. I don't know, I think 5 times in a row before he actually won the James Beard Award as the best chef Midwest. It was his 6th time. And we've talked about this before. What is the turning point for St. Louis? When did St. Louis really, really super hit its stride? Maybe when Gerard won that first James Beard Award, followed by Kevin Nash a year or two later. But Niche closed in Benton Park, moved to Clayton, and still, it was just a fantastic restaurant. When he moved to Clayton, though, Gerard had other restaurants, Brasserie and Pastaria and Taste, right? And I think that part of the issue with Niche was there were all these other affordable places, and Niche kind of became a special occasion place, and it got to be very expensive. But still, it was the restaurant that brought St. Louis to the dance.
It was. We cannot overstate Niche's impact on the modern St. Louis dining scene.
And I heard that there was talk of revitalizing Niche.
Oh, please, please, please.
And
Please let this happen.
I'm not sure if that's going to happen, but it wouldn't surprise me if it did.
Maybe if we put it out into the universe, it has to happen.
Right.
That's what we'll hope for here. Well, somewhere that I guess it didn't come back, but it kind of came back in different forms. The spirit, the energy is King Louis. King Louis, Matt McGuire's beloved restaurant on Choteau. What a moment in time. I know I said this about Monarch. King Louis was around the same time as Monarch, and it was just perfect. I don't even know again, this is what I get at with Matt McGuire's restaurants. Of course, he's at Louis and Wright's Tavern now. Those are his 2 spots that everyone talks about as the best restaurants in St. Louis. Matt just has this way of having such an X factor with everything he does. Everything comes together. Like the food is great, the atmosphere is great, the service is great, but there's kind of this intangible feeling you get when you sit in one of his restaurants, and King Louis had that.
And he was always able to attract the best talent.
Yes.
Kirk Warner was there. John O'Brien from Three Flags Tavern was there. Kerry McDowell, you might have heard of him. He was there. And it was just a strange place. He said, this is a place that me and a few of my college buddies, we bought a college bar and ended up running a fine dining restaurant.
Right?
He said it was a destination. It was a neighborhood restaurant that didn't have a neighborhood.
Exactly.
People came there from all parts of the county, and they didn't want people to know about it because it was their little private place. And it existed that way for a long time. And I guess you could loosely say that Louis and Clayton was its successor, although they're completely different restaurants.
So different. It's almost like if you could combine Louis Wright's and Three Flags Tavern in a way. You say John O'Brien, I definitely felt elements of King Louis in Three Flags Tavern. You know, a victim of the Highway 40 shutdown. Matt McGuire always says that his kid was skateboarding down the middle of Shoto one day with no traffic and said, "Dad, isn't this cool?" And he said, "This is the worst thing ever.
I remember that.
No
He
one
goes,
can get to my restaurant."
You have no idea how uncool this is.
Exactly. So terrible. So yeah, that's gone but not forgotten for sure.
Another restaurant with a very odd name, Riddle's Penultimate
Oh,
Cafe.
gosh. I still crave their
Penultimate.
blue cheese stuffed mushrooms on a weekly basis.
It was a really cool restaurant in the Del Mar Loop, one of them that was transformational for the Del Mar Loop. And this was Andy and Paul Ayers, and they had another Riddles. The original Riddles was up north. A lot of people don't know that. And this was in the former, I think, Bobby's Creole space. And it was just really interesting. It had a standing menu and a special menu. And the special menu, if you remember, Andy was a real nut about local places and local farmers and local suppliers. And he would tell little stories and lovingly referred. He's the first place that I remember that really got into.
Yes.
And boy, you feel like a real connection with these places
did.
when you eat there. And I'll never forget how much I learned reading Andy Ayers' menu at Riddle's. It was the first place I ever had a Cortino of wine, a quarter of a liter. He had the first place to offer a bunch of wines by the glass. He had 50 beers. It was a really, really unusual spot. And if you remember, he sold it to, I think, his daughter. And then he went on to start Eat Here St. Louis. So he went from kind of providing and offering foods in a restaurant venue to doing it on a wholesale level. And he's still around. And Andy Ayers he's one of the pioneers, kind of the unsung,
Yes.
a little bit behind the scenes pioneers in St. Louis. Anyway, Riddle's Penultimate, and why is it the penultimate? He said, I always thought I had one more in me, so I called it the Penultimate Cafe.
Wow.
So
what
that's
do you
that
know?
reason.
Well, here's a little fun fact for people who, like me, miss the blue cheese stuffed mushrooms. Colleen Clausen, who owns the little place down on Jefferson, Milk Toast, used to work at Riddle's. And she has their blue cheese stuffed mushroom recipe. Now, she does not do it in stuffed mushroom form, but if you ever see a blue cheese toast on her menu, it is slathered in the filling that used to be on those mushrooms. So if you're craving them, you can kind of get a little taste.
That's just a reason enough to go there.
I know.
And it's a great restaurant.
Exactly. Well, George, are we down to
Yeah,
our
we're down to we need a drum roll. We
We
didn't have to, but we decided to each pick our favorite of the faves. Go ahead.
most missed restaurant for me is Duff's in the Central West End.
You're not alone.
I truly am getting goosebumps thinking about how much I loved this restaurant. Not just because, you're talking about the first place you had espresso. This was the first place I think I had goat cheese. It was on a pizza. Oh, gosh, it was so delicious. Their French onion soup. They had a Caesar salad that lit my world on fire. I loved the food, but more so, I loved the spirit of Duff's. Duff's was this ragtag pirate ship motley crew of artsy independent spirits.
They put it together,
Oh my
they had no
gosh.
tables and chairs, and some friend said, I've got some
Yeah.
tables and chairs. Okay.
Yep.
And some guy goes, I'm a chef. Do you need a chef? Yeah, we need a chef. And this guy became the chef. That's how this place got put together.
Yes.
It's so random that it happened that way and that it worked.
Everything was so random. I remember so vividly. I could almost step in there today. You had the one side that was the bar side that was just brick, cozy, warm, fuzzy. Then the other side, bright, white, modern art. They could not have been different. It was such a juxtaposition, but it worked great. And I just loved the feel of it. I feel like that independent spirit, There are a couple places here in town that really embody that, but this was the one.
Well, and they had those poetry readings.
Yes. River Styx.
Yes.
Yes.
And I think that was Monday nights, and that became a thing, and it became nationally known. And anybody of note that came to St. Louis that wanted to do something like that, it became a meeting place for these
Yeah.
authors and folks like that who visited St. Louis. And it was so special and so magical. And I'll never forget when they finally closed in 2013, they hung a banner outside. Do you remember this? Don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened. Dr. Seuss, thank you very much.
Oh, gosh. I could almost shed a tear right now,
R.I.P.
George.
Gus.
R.I.P. And you have an R.I.P. that
I do. And,
funny is a stone's throw.
and it's right up the way, and it's called Balaban's. It was
Yes.
a classic place, opened in 1972, but they didn't really, I think, hit traction until they installed a copper-roofed sidewalk cafe.
That was
Do you remember that
gorgeous.
in
Yes.
1979?
Yes.
Those cafe windows would open and you could kind of
Yes.
see into the cafe, which was cool. They were kind of, it was like peekaboo through the curtains. It
Yeah.
was awesome.
You want to talk about peak Central West End dining?
It was the place.
was
It
it.
was the see and be seen place.
Yes.
And what was so unique about it is it was three different components. You had this cafe component. You walked through the cafe into the bar, which was rocking and rolling, and they had a playlist that was unbelievable. And then you'd go through those two components to get to the fine dining area,
Yes.
which was really, to this day, I can't even believe that it was designed that way. And two different menus, right? They had a cafe menu and a fine dining menu. And it was cool because you'd sit in that cafe and then you'd look into the bar, but it was all glassed. So you could see the action, but you didn't hear the action, which is the best way to
Perfect.
experience a bar.
Yes.
Anyway, it had so many fun things going for it.
It's like
and,
watching all the antics through a fishbowl.
and it was, yeah, the vibe and the swagger was so
Yes.
unique.
Oh,
and
my
and
gosh.
the waiters all wore black T-shirts. And I'll never forget, they were just loose as they could be. I
Yes.
had a very major birthday there, I remember, and somebody ordered shots for the table, and the server comes up, he serves the shots. He goes, "Oh, what do you know? There's an extra one." And so the server had a shot with us, and that's how
Oh,
the
yeah.
evening started. And that was so typical for Balaban's. But you remember that morel mushroom pasta.
Yes.
And there's so many dishes, the smoked trout pancake, that cucumber bisque. They did Ligurian shrimp pasta, beef Wellington. You could take
Yeah.
that menu and just like duplicate it
Yes.
and be successful.
Everything's so relevant to
I'm
this day.
convinced of it. Those chocolate fritters, just do that
Oh,
again.
those chocolate fritters. I haven't thought of those in forever, George.
Let's open a French cafe and
Let's
just
do
like
it.
that Balaban's menu and just be done with it.
Let's
So
do it.
anyway, that's near and dear to my heart, and I'll always love Balaban's. Spent a
Yes.
lot of time and dollars there.
Another RIP. These places gone, but never forgotten. George, I
All
feel
right.
like we need the bottle of wine or
I was
something.
going to
We're
say,
drowning our
we're sitting here
sorrows.
sobbing uncontrollably, but before it gets totally out of control, let's talk about the next segment. And it's a timely one because this has gotten just out of control. The price of eggs, what does that have to do with the price of eggs? Everything right now, because they're just through the roof, as everybody knows. And they're not going anywhere, unfortunately. This price increase is slated to continue throughout 2025.
I don't know if you've seen this at your grocery stores. My grocery store, it's not just the price. They're rationing them.
No, they're
limiting
allocated.
them. Yeah.
Yeah, a couple dozen per person. But I'm encouraged because I saw that Waffle House is charging 50 cents an egg,
Mhm.
which is really, it's very easy to understand. It's the fairest way to do it. So everybody, you pay $1 or $1.50. It's a very easy way to absorb all that. I know the Shack has done the same thing. It's $1 extra per egg item until this subsides. And I really think that's fair because you're not just doing it across the board.
Yes.
You're making the folks that are eating eggs pay for the eggs. You don't want that. If you don't like it, order something else.
This is why this is a micro rave rather than a micro rant. We're not complaining about the price, but we're giving a shout out to the people who are handling it in that way. I think it just seems so clear to people why the charge is there and why you're paying for it, who's absorbing that cost. We have been surcharged to death
Right.
ever since
Everybody
COVID
gets
with,
surcharged.
you get a service fee and a table fee and a credit card fee and this, that, and the other. And they all seem very nebulous. Whereas this, it's concrete. You want an egg, you pay a little bit extra. Easy.
And what's interesting about this too is I've seen this, and it's kind of become like an egg hunt. The consumers can find eggs around
Mhm.
town if they look for them, and you find them at some of these smaller markets.
Yeah.
The Parker's Tables of the world,
Yep.
the Box Hill Grocer, the farmers markets in general. So look around to the smaller markets, folks, and you might find some eggs. But in the meantime, you're going to have to suck it up because this is going to be here for a minute.
It will.
All right, that's it for this week on Arch Eats. Thanks for listening. Best dishes. Be sure to follow us and share with your friends. We always provide links in the show notes for everything you heard about today. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and follow along on Instagram at St. Louis Mag. And feel free to give us a follow personally at George Mahey and Cheryl A. Bear.
If you loved what you heard, show us some love by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. And if you're hungry for even more content, you can subscribe to our dining newsletters for the freshest coverage on the local restaurant and culinary scene.